Especially I'm thinking today about sort of the big questions that a lot of people in the world wrestle with, and concerning which, there might be, great differences of opinion. And it might be a question that you are very sure in your mind about what the answer is, but it could be that there's someone else in the world who's not so sure about that. So let's say, one of the big questions that has been going on in media for several years is the climate change. Is there climate change? What is causing it? How should we respond? And so that's a fairly significant question. And again, some of you might think, what do you mean it's a question? I know the answer, but not everyone thinks they know the answer. And another big question is, when it comes to nations and government and politics, is like, what kind of economic system is really best? It would be nice if we all knew the answer to those questions. If we could all be on the exact same page, and we knew what the answer is, and then we could all make decisions that we could agree on, and we could move forward into the future with confidence and so forth. But those are some questions that personally I wish there was a clear answer to, that everyone knew the answer. There are some discussions that I'm just really tired of, the discussion going on. In a church, for instance, there's still discussion. I read blogs about worship. What kind of worship should we have? Contemporary and traditional and all that kind of thing. And I'm so sick of that discussion, and I really wish everyone would just shut up about that discussion. But really, if we just knew the answer, if there would be writing in the sky, what kind of songs we could sing, that sure would be nice. If we had answers to certain kinds of questions that we could agree on. And of course, in this day where there's fake news, it even shows more critically how nice it would be if I just knew what was going on somewhere and what the truth was. So it's actually good news to have certain questions answered, even if the process of finding the answer might be very difficult or uncomfortable. It's actually good to know the answer. And one of the things the book of Exodus is doing is answering some critical questions for the people back then, and really for us. Quickly, though, just thinking about Exodus, I just want to remind us of the flow of Exodus, because it's a book that it's really important to read it as a story and to think about the order of the story, because the order of the events in the book of Exodus is very critical to understand what God is doing and how we're supposed to live. The story starts with deliverance, and we're still in this first section of the book of Exodus, where God is in the process, still kind of in the beginning stages of delivering or rescuing his people. But it starts with God's gracious deliverance of his people. But then there's a covenant. God makes an agreement with his people, and it starts off pretty well in chapters 20 to 24, and then there's kind of a big dive in the story, and the people are just massively stupid. And so they kind of have to renew the covenant with God, but they're developing this relationship with God. And then the other kind of weird thing in the book of Exodus is there's all these details about building the tabernacle. And it's really a lot of chapters when you look at that. And first God tells Moses the entire pattern of the tabernacle. That's 25 to 31. And then there's this great dive in the story, and then there's the building of it, and there's kind of the same details again, and why are there so many details there? But it's about actually the presence of God. The tabernacle is a way in which God can be present with his people. So that's one way to think about the flow of the book of Exodus. For us, this series, we're going to use the letter R in order to kind of have a simple way to think through what's going on in the book of Exodus and to try to put all the pieces together. So we don't often hear, do all words starting with the same letter. That's kind of a cheesy thing that preachers do, but I hope you'll forgive us. I hope this will be an easy way to think about Exodus. But one critical word is the word represent. It's not actually a word that you might see in Exodus a lot, or even the idea mentioned explicitly, but it's kind of a foundation for what's going on. And that is, God is communicating something about himself, and his people are going to represent him. Okay, in fact, what God does with his people and then through his people, it's all a story of God representing himself and his people communicating to the world out there who God is. Okay, they are chosen for a purpose, and part of that purpose is that they will then represent God in the world. In terms of the flow of the story, the next two critical words are rescue and relationship. Okay, whether you use the word rescue or deliverance or redeem or ransom, but it's that story of God bringing his people out. But he's bringing them out for a purpose. Oops, not there yet. And it's for this relationship. Okay, and so the covenant and the tabernacle, it's all about a relationship. And it's actually very important to keep those together, because one of the things that happens with the first part of Exodus is some people take that, God saving the slaves from slavery, is that's kind of the main thing what God is doing. He's liberating people. And it gets translated, the Bible story gets translated into a political story it's a story of political liberation. And that's the main thing that God is doing. But in Exodus, the liberation is for a purpose. The rescue is for a relationship, or as John talked about it last week, it's for worship. We're finding out who God is so that we will worship him. The worship is the main thing. It's the end point. The rescue is the necessary step to get where God wants us to be in relationship to him, representing him through our worship. But of course, in the book of Exodus, what a lot of people think of when they think of Exodus is, isn't that where there's the 10 Commandments? And then there's all those other commandments in a few other chapters, and so what about that? Where does that fit? And one of the dangers of kind of our mind immediately going there is the ongoing danger of the people of God as we make those rules or those laws the center of the story, the main thing in the story. And so some people might think, Exodus is about the law. And whatever words you want to use, law, ordinances, directions, advice, expectations, whatever, it's that this is what you got to do. And so we were, thinking about how to put this together, and we were almost tempted just to kind of leave that out of the picture, to kind of communicate it's not the main thing. But because that's just still kind of there, we have to deal with those rules. We are including the word rules here. That's our R word. So the only reason we're using the word rules is because it's R. Okay, but whatever words you want to use, the law, commandments, direction, it's still that idea of things people are expected to do and are supposed to do. And so they're in the story, and it's intentional that that's in smaller font than the other words. Okay? Those rules are not as important in terms of the overall story. They're kind of literally in the middle of Exodus, but they're not in the middle of the story. But one reason to see where rules are in relationship to the whole story is that it helps us to understand why some of the rules are there. I mean, for instance, if we're going to represent God, then we need some help in how to do that. How do we represent God? And so God is helping us with that. These are the things you can do so that you will represent me more accurately. Because a lot of other religions do things to represent their God. Okay? But in my mind, maybe coming from a different worldview, I'm thinking I'm not interested in that God. If he's represented by that action, I'm not interested in that God. And so God gives some of these rules to help us to represent him better. And the truth is, any relationship needs some kind of rules. Again, you don't have to use the word rules, but there's expectations. And however much two people love one another, love never works if we just say, just love is enough and we don't need to have any rules. It never works that way. No relationship works that way. Every healthy relationship, and you know this, has certain expectations you're supposed to do. And if you don't do it, it affects the relationship. It just does. Okay? And it's actually good that we are told these are some things that are expected in this relationship. Okay? I mean, if you go to work somewhere and they don't tell you the expectations, and then you get a job review at the end of a year and they say, oh, you didn't do this and you didn't do that, and you're like, you didn't tell me, and it's like, that's very frustrating. You want to know what the expectations are in the relationship, and so that's how some of these rules or laws or commandments, and we'll talk about them more in depth later, but how they fit into the picture. They've got to be there. We can't just take them out, but it's critical that we understand their place and keep them in their place and use those laws in the correct way. But for today especially, I'm thinking about this word represent and where we are in the story and what God is doing in order for people to know who He is, in order for Him to answer some critical questions that people need to know. The last couple of weeks, we've been looking at Moses and God's call of Moses, and Moses has kind of been resisting his call. He doesn't want to do it, send anyone else but me. I can't do it for this reason, that reason, and so forth. But, God is kind of patient. At the same time, God doesn't change His mind. Okay, God called Moses, and Moses has got to do it. Okay, and so whether he wants to or not, Moses is being pushed along. And so he, with his brother Aaron, finally go to Pharaoh, and they say, this is what the Lord, the God of Israel, says. Let my people go so they may hold a festival to me in the wilderness. In a sense, God and Moses are making it easy on Pharaoh. They're asking for something reasonably simple. They're just saying, let us go for a few days, let us go out into the wilderness. We're going to hold this big festival to our God. We'll sacrifice to our God. And that's all they're asking at this point of Pharaoh. They're not asking to leave completely. I mean, that's how the story is going to end. But they're just, all Pharaoh knows is they just want to go out and worship their God a little bit. But still Pharaoh says no. And if he had just said no, it might not have been so bad. Okay, but I mean, actually, I titled this sermon in our Facebook post, you can't read that well, Famous Last Words. Sometimes last words are literally the last words people say, and I looked up on the internet, famous last words, the last thing certain people said. It's pretty interesting what some people said as their dying words. But famous last words can also refer to words that people say that they come very quickly to regret. And that was his famous last words, and it didn't come out that way, and he wishes he didn't say those words, right at that point. And so Pharaoh is going to use some words that he's going to come to regret. But this is Pharaoh's response to Moses and Aaron. Who is the Lord? You use this name Yahweh about your God. Who is He anyway? That's not the name of any of our gods. We've got our own gods. Who is He? Who is He? He's not our God. I don't know that name. That might be your tribal God when you were up in Canaan, but He has nothing to do with my land. That Yahweh, this Lord, who is He? Pharaoh says. Who is the Lord that I should obey Him and let Israel go? I don't know the Lord, and I will not let Israel go. I mean, I just reading it like that, it's like, man, if he only knew what he was saying. If he only knew, he would take those words back. But what we see here is defiance. Defiance to this God of Israel. And the question, who is He, is not just a statement about, needing more information. I mean, the critical part is that why should I obey Him? I'm not going to obey Him. And Pharaoh's problem is not so much about this particular God. He's got a bunch of gods. He could add another God. He could add Yahweh to all the other gods they're worshiping in Egypt. People do that all the time, add another God. His problem isn't with that. His problem is he doesn't want to do what this God says. This God is giving a message, and he doesn't want to submit to that message. And so he says these defiant words. And this is actually is quite common if you have conversations with people who are skeptics, and they often give all sorts of reasons why they don't want to believe, and they, look on the internet and contradictions in the Bible, or there's this and there's this I can't believe about, and this they give all these intellectual reasons why they don't want to believe in God. And if you keep having a conversation, you penetrate, you can sometimes get people to actually say, well, it's not, my problem isn't really with my mind. I don't want to obey. I've had people tell me that. That's, I don't want Jesus to be Lord. That's my problem. And so I'm going to tell myself, oh, he wasn't crucified, he wasn't raised from the dead. But the problem is a heart problem, an unwillingness to submit. And Pharaoh is unwilling to submit to the message of the Jewish God Yahweh. And so he says these defiant words, who is he? And the rest of the story is going to unfold from that. And everything that's going to happen is going to be an answer to Pharaoh's question. And in a sense, Pharaoh's going to bring what happens on his own head with these words. These words are going to explain the next few chapters. Are going to be very, very hard, but it all comes from here. But Pharaoh kind of sets up this conflict, this fight, not just with Moses, but with God. And in fact, in this fight, Pharaoh is going to win the first round. Okay, because after this, he's going to make it harder for the Jewish people. So they're kind of working as slaves in Egypt, and they're making bricks, and archaeologists have discovered that this was a common thing going on, and bricks were usually a certain kind of normal brick size and made out of clay and mud and that kind of thing. And so that's what the children of Israel were mainly doing as slave workers, making bricks. So Pharaoh uses this occasion of Moses and Aaron saying we want to go out for the festival to make it harder. And so in the bricks you would put straw to make them stronger and so forth. And normally when they were making bricks, other people would bring the straw to the brick makers. But now Pharaoh says, no more straw. You've got to go out and find your own straw and also make the bricks. And by the way, you've got to keep making as many bricks as you ever made. Even if it takes more time to find straw, you can't make less bricks, you've got to keep it up. And then they're starting to beat the Jewish foremen are getting beaten. And so they're in between. They're telling their fellow Jewish people, you've got to do more. And they're getting beaten. They can't go up to Pharaoh. Pharaoh's not listening to them. Their slave masters aren't listening to them. Do they want to start beating their own fellow Jewish people? They don't want to do that. And they're stuck in the middle. And Pharaoh is making these accusations. You guys are just lazy. That's why you want to go out in the desert and worship your God and blah, blah, blah. And it's just, you can't do it. What's wrong with you guys? Work harder and work harder and work harder. And these poor Jewish workers, especially these foremen, they're caught in the middle. And Pharaoh is being really, really smart here. He's made some kind of dumb moves, in trying to deal with this problem of this Jewish horde in his land of Egypt, so killed all the male babies. That was kind of stupid for a lot of reasons. Here he's making a good move because he's kind of dividing the people. So these foremen, these Jewish foremen go to Moses and Aaron, and they're like, this is your fault. You brought this, you've come and you've made Pharaoh angry, and now he's making it hard on us, and this is what you have done. So this is a classic move on the part of Pharaoh, is just dividing the people. So they're going to be a divided group, and they're not going to be united, and so they're going to be kind of stay in their slave state in this divided way. And so Pharaoh wins the first round. His plan is working. And so Moses returns to the Lord and says, really? We ask that question, really, God? Oh Lord, why have you brought harm to this people? Why did you send me? What in the world am I doing here? I didn't ask for this job. And now I'm getting all this criticism. Ever since I came to Pharaoh to speak in your name, he's done harm to this people, and you've not delivered your people at all. And true enough, he hasn't. It's just gotten worse. And Moses can't see the deliverance on the horizon. And so Moses here is experiencing a great deal of doubt. No doubt fear and disappointment. He's a little bit disappointed in God, no doubt. I'm sure he's got some anger at God. He might be angry at Pharaoh, but now he's going to be a little bit angry at God, I imagine. That happens often, if we're honest. Really, God? Why? Why did you do that? So this is a common experience, and Moses, one of the great ones of the Old Testament, is feeling it, is feeling the tension, the discomfort, and the doubt. No doubt doubting, is God really good? Is he actually going to do something good for us? Maybe he's actually our enemy. Maybe this was God's plot to make it even harder, for the Jewish people. Or maybe God is good enough, but he doesn't really have power here. Maybe the Egyptian gods are too strong for Yahweh. And maybe our putting our trust in this God is not going to work out for us. So this is what Moses is experiencing at this point, and it's perfectly understandable. I mean, he's been having a long debate with God now. They've never had a normal conversation, God and Moses, yet. It's pretty amazing. Eventually, they're going to have this amazing face-to-face relationship, but man, they've not had a normal, healthy relationship, Moses and God, yet in the story, I don't think. And Moses is struggling. Then the Lord said to Moses, "Now, I've been waiting." They've been in Egypt for 400 years. They've been kind of enslaved for who knows how long. Moses, 80 years old. It was already 40 years. It was 80 years since Pharaoh tried to kill, Moses and those babies at that generation. 40 years since Moses first made his kind of aborted attempt to rescue the people. It's been a long wait. But now you will see what I will do to Pharaoh. Because of my mighty hand, he's going to let them go. In fact, because of my mighty hand, he will drive them out of his country. He will say, "Quickly, get out of here, get out of here." No doubt at that point, Pharaoh will be thinking, "I should have just said that weeks ago." God also said to Moses, "I am the Lord. I am Yahweh. I am who I said I am. I am who I am, and I will be who I will be, and I will do what I said I will do, because that's who I am. That's my name. I'm the Lord. And I appeared to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. Your forefathers, they knew me as well. Remember their stories. To them, I appeared mainly as God Almighty, El Shaddai, the mighty God. Abraham and Isaac and Jacob knew him mainly through that kind of title, the mighty God. But by my name, the Lord, I did not make myself fully known to them. That can be understood different ways, because Yahweh is actually used in the book of Genesis, and it's used in the stories of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. And probably the idea is this, that name Yahweh was used, but no one really knew the meaning of the name. It was just a name, like, a lot of us know one another's names, but it's just a name, it's just a word. And some of you probably have a great meaning to your name that is lost on me until you explain the meaning of your name. And when I know the meaning of your name, then it's really cool. So probably that's what's going on here. Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob knew the word Yahweh, the name, but they didn't know what it really meant. And now God is revealing what that name means. They knew me as God Almighty, but by my name Yahweh, I didn't make myself fully known to them. But I established my covenant with them to give them the land of Canaan, where they resided as foreigners. Moreover, I have heard the groaning of the Israelites, whom the Egyptians are enslaving, and I have remembered my covenant. We've seen those words, see, hear, and remember, already repeatedly. And like we've said before, in the Old Testament, those words are not mental words, are not like literally hear with the ears or see with their eyes. It's not like God forgot, literally. You need to be reminded. For God, they're action words. I've heard and I'm going to do something. I remembered, I'm remembering by stepping down and doing something. Therefore, say to the Israelites, I am the Lord, and I will bring you out from under the yoke of the Egyptians. I will free you from being slaves to them. I will redeem you. I will rescue. I'll rescue. That's the R word. I will rescue you. And with outstretched arm and with mighty acts of judgment, I will take you as my own people, and I will be your God. That's relationship. It's why he's rescuing them. Not just to get them out of Egypt, but to bring them to himself. That's why God does anything in our life. Because he wants us in relationship. He wants to be present with us. How different that is from many other gods who might do great things but don't necessarily come close to his people. Yahweh is not like any other God. To take you as my own people, and I will be your God, and then you'll know that I am the Lord your God, who brought you out from under the yoke of the Egyptians. I will bring you to the land I swore with uplifted hand to give to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. I will give it to you as a possession. I am the Lord. And again, you should see that repetition. I mean, God's response, beginning and end and middle. I am the Lord. Remember who I am. I'm the Lord. I am who I am, and I will do what I said I was going to do. It's all wrapped up in my name. It's all wrapped up in my identity. My rescuing people isn't just something I choose to do or not do or whatever. It's who he is. It's who he is. So that's the Lord's response to Moses, and it's still going to be hard. And there's still going to be some hard dialogue between Moses and God, and it's going to take a while. And the next part of the story, is going to probably take who knows how many weeks, till it's all going to unfold, and come out okay at the end. But it's not going to be a smooth story. But this is how God begins this process with Moses. Remember who I am. So we have defiance and we have doubt. These are two responses that we're finding in Exodus 5 and 6. Those are the chapters we're in, by the way. I don't think I ever said what chapters we're in. Exodus 5 and 6, if you want to follow in your Bibles. But the response to both of these is the same, and that is to know who he is. I am the Lord. I am the Lord. The same response. God can use those words to Moses. Pharaoh isn't going to get it with words. He's going to have to see God in action. But here's one of the things I want us to think about now as we come heading toward the end, is that there's actually a lot of good news here in what God is going to do. Even how God is going to respond to the defiance of Pharaoh. There's an element of good news here because Pharaoh actually needs to know the truth. He needs an answer to the question, who is the Lord? And it's good that God is going to answer that question. It's not going to be easy for Pharaoh to learn that lesson, and he probably still won't accept the message. But it's good for Pharaoh to know, because see, Pharaoh and his people are trusting other gods. And that's bad. It's bad news. Those gods are going to fail them. They need to have the right God. They need to know the answer to the question, who do they worship? They need the answer to that question. And they have the wrong answer to that question. They need the right answer, and God is giving them the right answer, who to worship. And Yahweh is saying, worship me. I'm the best God for you. All those other relationships are going to fail you. You need to know the answer to that question. It's like if you have, parents of children who are growing up and they're finding a boyfriend or a girlfriend, and you're trying to help them sort that through. And, teenagers might not always have all the synapses in the brains working so well, and they kind of want things that aren't the best, and you know that. But your kid doesn't necessarily want to hear that question, but that guy's going to break your heart. She's going to break your heart. It's not going to work out. It's not going to be good. You don't know it yet. But that's going to be a disappointment. Those other relationships are going to be disappointing. And if you just understood, this is good news, and it's hard for me to tell you that it's better for you to break up with this girl or this guy or whatever. It's actually good news. Don't buy that car. It's going to disappoint you. Don't get that house. It's going to disappoint you. Don't get this job. It might disappoint you. Don't put your trust in that, because it's going to end up giving you false hope, and it's going to disappoint you. And we want answers to all those kind of questions: who to marry, and what to buy, and where to live, and who to worship. And it's a good news when God gives us the answer to that question. And sometimes it's hard for us to get that answer, but even in response to Pharaoh's defiance, God's answer is actually good news. And how much better the Egyptian people would have been if they had turned from all those other gods and served Yahweh alone. How much better. What a better God Yahweh would have been for them. But then, of course, in response to Moses' doubt, he's got to learn to trust God, and he's going to largely figure it out. And so he's going to be an amazing man of faith, but he's still learning this. But he's going to need to hold on to this truth, because now he's got to lead thousands of people in the desert. I mean, if he was disappointed with God before, he's going to be disappointed with God, and with thousands of people he's got to lead. If anything would cause me to give up, it's leading thousands of those people. So he's going to have something to hold on to as he leads those people for 40 years in the desert. I wouldn't do it. If anything would cause me to go back to Egypt, it would be having to lead those people. Moses got to know that I'm the Lord. Now, here's one of the things I want to just communicate about this defiance and doubt, and it's still part of the good news I want us to consider in relationship to this message. God's answer to defiance and doubt is still the same. This is who I am. I'm the Lord. I cannot be anyone else but the Lord, and I am who I am, and I'm going to do what I'm going to do, and I'm not going to change. Okay, and so that's the answer to both. But in other ways, these responses of defiance and doubt are not on the same level. And here's what I mean. The defiance on the part of Pharaoh is really going to be bad news for him. And it's going to be a harsh response on the part of God. But some people think about, defiance and doubt, not there yet, is both kind of equally bad. And there's some people who have this kind of view of faith, that we ought to just have this amazingly robust view of faith that, I'm just, every day with Jesus is better than the day before, and that, God is going to do everything that I need, and it's just great with God, and I have no problem, no worries, and no fears. And if you ever express the slightest amount of doubt or fear, someone might come along and say, "Oh, that's terrible. What a terrible sin that you have some doubt." Not in the Bible. It's just amazing how many characters in the Bible walked many years with struggle and doubt and fear. Abraham is a great example of faith. Well, Hebrews tells us he's a great example of faith. Genesis shows us some times of really weak faith. David is a man after God's own heart. Man, you read the Psalms, and he's got some struggle with God. People who walk with God struggle with God. And in many ways, doubt is a part of faith. Doubt is a part of faith. We need faith because we have doubt, but it's a part of faith. If we didn't have doubt, in a sense, we wouldn't need faith. One day, in a sense, we won't need faith and we won't have doubt. But that's not this day. We're walking like Moses, and we have these doubts, and this is just what it's been like for God's people with God. That they have to walk step by step, and they don't see all the steps. And they don't always feel God's presence, but they just keep walking. Abraham had faith because whatever else, Yahweh was his God. And he was looking different directions and making stupid mistakes, but he was still holding on to God. And that was enough. That was just enough for Abraham. It's going to be just enough for Moses. And he still probably will ask the question, really, God, what are you doing? But he's going to keep taking steps of faith. And so I just want to say that if you experience your life right now as a lot of doubt and fear, I want to say that's normal. I want to say it's normal. It's how it's going to be. I don't know of anyone, any honest person walking with God who doesn't walk with doubt and fear and disappointment. I don't know of any. And actually, if someone told me, I've never had any doubts or fears since I knew Jesus, I'm going to think they're lying. Seriously, I will. I just think doubt is just part of our walk right now until we see God face to face. Now, it doesn't mean that doubt is just okay. I would rather not doubt. I mean, people who know me know that I have a lot of anxiety. I'm very easily stressed. And Sunday morning, little extra stress. Some people think, on the Sundays you don't preach, you don't have stress. No, I have stress, maybe more stress. And when I'm not here, I still have stress on Sunday. I experience life as stress. Okay, it's stupid. And if I were to imagine what God thinks about that, I imagine God is thinking, Mark, really? You don't have to be so stressed. But I don't think God is angry at me. I don't think God is angry with me about my stress. He might think I'm stupid. Okay, and many people in this room think I'm stupid because of how stressed I get about things, okay? But I don't think God is angry at me. It's disappointing maybe to him, and I'm disappointed. I wish I wasn't a stressful person, but I pay the price for my stress. But God and I, because of that, are just... that's the worst thing about me is not my life of stress. So one of the sayings we're going to have several times in this series that Nenad has kind of introduced us to, we are only sometimes who we ought to be, but God is always who he is. We are only sometimes who we ought to be or who we want to be, but God is always who he is, and this is always the good news. He is who he is, and he will always be who he will be, and we can trust him. We don't necessarily know exactly how it's going to work out. Most of the time we won't. We just have to take those steps. Just have to take the steps, and then you're surprised. I mean, when Communitas started, I had no idea what was going to happen. I didn't know what I was doing. I didn't think I was the person for it, other than I felt like I was the one God was tapping on the shoulder and saying, this is the way we're going. And I could never have imagined this. And I've never felt like I'm even able to do what I'm doing. And I never really feel like I'm doing a good job. But it's like I'm just taking whatever steps God says to take. And I don't know what's going to happen next. But here we are. Here we are, because God is who he is, and he's doing what he's doing. And it comes out as surprise, but it comes out as, wow. God did it. We'll pray, and then the worship team can come up, and we're going to respond with a song that I think will fit very much with the message.